Within the reptile keeping community, we consider ourselves animal lovers, because we do. We love our animals. We also consider ourselves animal advocates. We do our absolute best to teach people that reptiles aren't as scary as they think, that reptiles can make phenomenal pets, and that they are wonderful, beautiful members of the global ecosystem. Yet, in a world where the reptile community is bigger than it's ever been, yet the general population's opinion on reptiles hasn't really shifted, while we are dealing with so many species disappearing from the wild, is it fair to ask the question, are we as reptile keepers actually doing anything good for reptiles, or are we actually part of the problem? My name is Cole, this is Astrid, welcome back to Boas and Buffoonery. This is gonna be a tough one. I think a big part of the reason why this discussion is so difficult for those of us within the reptile community to grapple with is because our passion for these animals is so genuine and often developed at a very young age. I know for myself that a big part of what got me obsessed with reptiles in the first place was finding things like garter snakes and water snakes in my backyard, in my community, seeing them interact with their natural environment and then holding them and feeling this incredible sense of wonder. Then when I was told that you can keep reptiles as pets, my mind just blew up with excitement. I mean, the idea of building a relationship with these often misunderstood creatures, especially if I can then use that relationship to change the way other people look at reptiles, maybe they can see just a glimpse of what I see in reptiles, well, that's just amazing. It gave me this incredible sense of purpose. And even throughout my relatively short time in the reptile hobby, I have seen such a dramatic shift in people's focus when it comes to keeping reptiles. I have seen this amazing turn towards larger, more naturalistic enclosures for their animals. I've seen people be more thoughtful about the heating and the lighting and potentially bioactive enclosures and what that might mean for their specific animal. And these are all phenomenal changes for the animals that we keep. But it still doesn't really solve the conservation dilemma. And the conservation dilemma, as I see it, is that in order for us to keep pet reptiles, in order for these beautiful animals to be in our homes, in a box, even a beautiful box, they had to, at some point, or their ancestors had to, at some point, be taken out of the wild. And in many cases, this causes profoundly negative impacts on wild populations. I'll give you an example. Over this past year, I have had the pleasure of working with many native species here in Ontario, Canada. And one species that I've had the joy to work with is the spotted turtle. These adorable, beautiful turtles are incredibly popular pets in Europe. And that makes a whole lot of sense. They are tiny turtles, they are absolutely beautiful, they're super, super cute, and they don't live quite as long as some of the other turtle species that people keep. Think your red ear sliders or your redfoot tortoises. So I don't blame people for wanting a pet spotted turtle. They're phenomenal. However, they are an endangered species in the wild. And their collection for the pet trade, along with habitat loss and habitat destruction, is what is causing their population to so rapidly decrease. And if this is happening in Ontario, Canada, just imagine what's happening in the Amazon rainforest or the jungles of Malaysia or the deserts of Northern Africa. Just imagine the amount of species that we are losing in the wild so that you can post a picture of a cool lizard on Instagram. It should be no secret by now that our hobby was practically built on the back of smuggling, of illegal collection. It is unfortunately sort of the foundation by which captive keeping of reptiles was built. But what can we as modern day keepers do to prevent this issue from being exacerbated in the future? Well, the first and easiest thing you can do is to make sure that the animals you buy are captive bred. They were born and raised in captivity, and preferably their parents were born and raised in captivity. Unless you have plans to sort of breed a species that is abundant in the wild, and you know how to safely import animals that are not at risk in the wild, you should not be getting a wild caught animal. There's just no need for it in a world where captive breeding is so abundant. And this is not to say that any collection of wild animals for a captive captive setting is inherently detrimental, there are many zoos and research facilities that are working on breeding projects to bring back wild animals or to support the current population of declining species so that they can begin to recover. And that's fantastic. That I am in full support of. But you, as a private pet keeper, are not a conservation authority. It should not be on you, and it can't reasonably be on you to try to propagate a species that is in decline. But what happens when captive breeding goes too far, where the supply of captive animals just outweighs the demand? Well, then we get into the ball python problem. The ball python dilemma is sort of the other extreme from the conservation dilemma, where an animal is bred too much in captivity, and in my opinion, for the wrong reasons. Now, I'm not just talking about ball pythons. I'm also talking about corn snakes, bearded dragons, leopard geckos, these animals that are in every single pet store that are being bred en masse by the community and by conglomerate corporations. I am talking about animals that are bred for color mutations and morph to the level where normals or undesirable morphs are being tossed aside to rescues, are being euthanized in many cases, or in other cases are left to rot in breeder tubs in a back room at a facility because they do not serve the financial goals of a breeder. And truth be told, this is a dilemma that I do not have a good answer for. I don't know what the reptile hobby en masse can do about the ball python dilemma, outside of not buying ball pythons or not buying these morph ball pythons and all the other animals that I mentioned in order to reduce the financial incentive of overbreeding these animals. But that creates a brutal ethical catch-22, where I say that I don't want you to go out and buy a wild caught animal, but I also don't want you to go out and buy the most readily available captive bred animal on the entire market. And I really don't know what the answer is. I don't have a solution to this problem. I just know that I see it as a problem. It's part of why I don't have a ball python. It's part of why I do not have a corn snake or a bearded dragon. And if I were to look into getting one of those animals, I would look towards rescues. I think rescues are a phenomenal option. It's something that I've talked a little bit more about in recent videos because I think it's really important to explore all your options when you're bringing a reptile into your home, especially if you want to be considerate of the ethical impact of that decision. But that is exactly why I think it is so important to support ethical breeders who take phenomenal care of their adult animals and take phenomenal care to make sure that their babies go to good homes. And I think if you don't know or don't have access to an ethical breeder in your area, that you look towards local rescues, because there are probably more of them in your area than you realize if you go looking. But I also think it's really important that if you keep pet reptiles, that you have a purpose in doing so. It doesn't have to be grandiose, but you should be able to advocate for your animals within your community. Not on any massive, large scale, but you should be able to talk to your friends, your family, maybe your coworkers about reptiles to get them excited about reptiles. Steve Irwin once said, and I'm sure I'm butchering this quote because I don't have it in front of me, but Steve Irwin once said that if we can get people excited about animals, then it is a heck of a lot easier to save them. And I think that's really important to remember, that if you are able to advocate for reptiles in your community using your pet reptiles to do so, then those in your community are going to be more likely to engage with local conservation and vote with conservation in mind, something Ontario really dropped the ball on. But no, I don't think we're bad guys or part of the problem for keeping pet reptiles, but I do think that the reptile community as a whole can do a substantially better job at being part of the solution to the problems, as opposed to just kind of being there, that guy that has snakes in his basement. I love keeping pet reptiles. It's probably the single biggest joy in my life. But I think if you want to keep pet reptiles, you should really consider your why. Why do you want to keep pet reptiles? For me, when I started keeping snakes, the biggest thing that I wanted to accomplish was to eliminate the fear of snakes in as many people as I possibly could. First and foremost, if I could just eliminate my own mother's fear of snakes, then that would be more than enough reason for me to want to continue keeping them. Selfishly, finally, I also love keeping snakes because they provide me with such a sense of peace and calm when I interact with them. And I don't know if you can tell from these videos, but I am not a particularly calm person. At the end of the day, I actually want more people to keep pet reptiles than already do. I think that can only make our community stronger. I also just really want people who keep pet reptiles to consider the fact that the way they purchase their animals, the way they care for their animals, and the way they interact with their animals, especially within their community, greatly impacts not just the animals that they keep, not just the people's perspective on themselves and their animals, but also can greatly impact the global environment when we're talking about exotic species. And you're going to make mistakes. We all have, we all do. Even personally, I know that one of the animals in my collection, Kaz the Crebo, I was told that he was captive bred, but honestly, we have our doubts. There are so many questions and dilemmas about the reptile hobby that I don't have a good answer for, that I don't have a good solution to. So if you have something to add to this discussion, please leave a comment below. I would genuinely love to hear from you. I think that would be fantastic. I think the more the reptile community can work together and improve this beautiful hobby that we all share, I think that makes it better. And on your way down to the comment section, if you could like this video and subscribe to the channel, it would genuinely mean the world to me. I know that every YouTuber kind of says it, but it really does make a huge difference. My friends, have a wonderful rest of your day, a phenomenal rest of your week, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers. Something Ontario really dropped the ball on.